Hear me.
Вот скажи мне, американец, в чем сила?
А вы что, собираетесь на ней жениться?
Да.
Ух, красота-то какая, лепота.
Таможня дает добро.
И вообще не называй меня, пожалуйста, Вероникой. Кто я? Вот кто я?
Отныне в русской земле единый быть.
Don't torture me, I can't live without him.
Hi, my name's Ali, and this is the Russophiles Unite podcast, where we watch Russian films and films with a Russian connection. As always, I'm joined by a guest, and today my guest is Tanya. Hi, Tanya.
Hi, Ali.
Thanks very much for coming on the show.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, it's really great to have you on. And this is kind of a rarity for this show, but considering our subject matter, we should really do it a bit more often. But you're actually Russian, which is...
I am. I happen to be Russian. Risky.
Yeah, for people who hadn't sort of suspected from the fact that your name's Tanya, but, you know.
My full name is actually Tatiana. That might be more suggestive.
Sure, right, yeah, Tatiana is very much, yeah, whereas Tanya, yeah.
Tanya is officially the short name for Tatiana, but I grew tired because I live in New York, and I grew tired of explaining that to people because I want to be called Tanya anyway, so I just went with it.
Yeah. So anyway, before we talk about what film we're going to watch today, could you tell us all a little bit more about yourself, Tanya?
Yes, so I was born and raised in Moscow, Russia. I graduated from high school there, and then I moved to New York shortly afterwards to attend NYU's film and television program at Tisch School of Arts. And after I graduated, I stayed in New York, and I'm currently working in TV. I'm producing shows mostly these days.
So, yeah, again, it's nice to have someone on who has a film background.
Yeah. In fact, I should mention that I decided to go to film school in the big part because of my family. I have a kind of a history of filmmakers in the family. My great-grandmother, Elena Maximova, was a famous actress in the beginning of the 20th century back in the USSR. My grandfather, her son, was a documentary filmmaker who went to VGIK, the Moscow Film School. And then my dad is currently also a producer and a television actor back in Moscow. So I thought that was part of my thinking when I chose filmmaking as my career path, or at least, academically. Because I thought that maybe I could continue the lineage in some form.
Yeah, I mean, that's like a veritable cinematic dynasty right there.
Yeah, one may say so.
But in terms of, like, the filmmakers that inspired beyond your family, who was it that kind of made you decide, I want to continue this tradition?
Right, well, I grew up in a household where we were watching a lot of Soviet movies growing up. So I grew up with a lot of Soviet comedies of the 60s and the 70s. I think that kind of formed, they sealed my love for filmmaking to begin with. That was early on when I didn't even consider it as a career. I loved it. I grew up with Chaplin and Buster Keaton and a lot of silent films as well. Because obviously, because of the filmmaking background, my dad was a big fan, and I used to watch a lot of Harold Lloyd films with him. I will never forget I forget what's the name of the film with Harold Lloyd, famous one where he is hanging on the clock when he's...
Oh, Safety Last.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
I love that. It was just it spoke to me. Buster Keaton with his sad face, the stone face, I was infatuated with that. So that was the early years when I decided. I didn't decide up until the very last minute, actually, that I want to go to New York and I want to go to film school. So when I chose that as a degree to pursue, I started, exploring it a bit further. I still do. I love earlier Woody Allen films. I love Coen Brothers. in terms of other influences, probably Fellini, I would say. Again, because of the parents. My father is also a big fan of Fellini, so we had the entire filmography on our in our house. So I watched that early on. I would say
awesome.
it's coming from all over the place.
Sure. To my shame, I don't think I've actually seen any Fellini. It's very much
Not a single
on my
one?
list.
What about the famous ones, La Dolce Vita or 8.5? No?
Yeah, that's the thing. I've seen like little famous clips from 8.5, but I haven't actually sat down and watched the whole thing. So that's very much on the to-do list. So besides Fellini, I'm just looking at that list, and there's quite a strong comedy thread running through that.
That is true.
Which leads me on to my next question, which was, you've also done stand-up as well. So how did you get into that?
I am drawn. I've always considered. I don't know. I think comedy is a better expression of an idea. I mean, I like the idea of expressing things through comedic lens. When I came to New York and I was still in school, I had a chance to intern with Stephen Colbert, his previous show called The Colbert Report on Comedy Central. And I think that was the first time when I realized that I might pursue it a bit more. So over the years, I've had a chance to work with a few great comedians professionally. I worked with Stephen Colbert and John Oliver and Samantha Bee.
I was going to say, my compatriot, yeah.
Michelle Wolf. So after a while, I was kind of immersed in that industry. I realized that I want to write for those shows, and I obviously looked at what people did to be there, and I realized that most of the writers have either improv or stand-up backgrounds. So I tried to do both. So I did improv at UCB, and I've also tapped my fingers into stand-up. I just started doing open mics in New York. It's very recent. I started maybe in January of this year, so it's nothing. I haven't been doing it for even a year yet, but I certainly have enjoyed it. And at this point, I've had a chance to perform at a few great clubs here in the city.
How do you actually prep for doing a stand-up gig? Because it's something that I've occasionally thought, oh, maybe I should try my hand up, but I've never really, had I'm definitely doing this, I have to make it work.
It's a moment. It's a momentary thing. I don't think it's a thing that you prepare for. At least that's not my experience.
Oh, okay.
I just decided to do it, and that's it. You kind of sit down and you write down your material. You figure out what you want to say. I also took a few classes, so that helped kind of jumpstart it. So I worked with a guy who's a professional stand-up comedian here in the city who kind of helped me shape some of my material a little bit, but it comes, I don't know, I would say it just happened. And I realized, I mean, it's pretty obvious that it's a weird position to be a Russian living in New York in 2018. Given Russia is very much on the forefront of the agenda for many reasons.
Is that right, Tanya? That totally passed me by.
Yeah, exactly. So I thought it's pretty obvious, and I thought it would be interesting to tap into that and to kind of explore that, but bring it from the perspective of a Russian. Right? It's kind of, it has a unique perspective a little bit. So I thought that might be interesting. And I was just interested in it. And I just... my father, he used to be, before he became an actor, back in the day, he was he had his rock band, and he would tour the Soviet Union with a rock band. So I think that's where the love for stage is coming from, too. I was drawn to it. I like the attention. I like the spotlight. So it's very selfish, but it's indulgent, really.
Well, I am really not in a position to criticize as somebody who's been in a band in the past and is also.
So you're familiar with that rush for that.
The kind of like it's nice to have a captive audience, especially if they're appreciative.
Oh, absolutely. And I honestly don't think there's any bigger joy than making people laugh and seeing and hearing them laugh. That's just it's euphoric.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Totally agree. So it's pretty apt then that the film we're covering today is very much a comedy. So I'm going to try and land this because it's a long Russian title. Like, the first two bits is fine. It's the second bit you get into the verbs, and then, Russian verbs are typically long. This isn't even a long one, really. But anyway.
I believe in you. You can do it.
Okay, so here goes. So the title is Добро пожаловать, welcome, или Посторонним вход воспрещен, which variously translated is or no trespassing. Probably a more literal translation is no unauthorized access, or unauthorized access is forbidden.
Yeah, well, in Russia, that's a common sign that you would see.
Yeah,
it's basically it's no trespassing.
No trespassing is the succinct little translation. Yeah, absolutely.
Although I found out that in the UK, when the film was released, it was translated into "No holiday for Inishkin." Inishkin being the character of the show, of the film.
Yeah, which is much more succinct, but we were chatting back and forth about this before we did the recording, and I think we both agreed that whilst in some ways it's a less unwieldy title, it doesn't really capture...
Definitely. It doesn't capture the inherent contradiction, that the director, Elem, Klimov, wanted to kind of, communicate.
Yes. So, yes, I should say this will be a second watch for me and an umpteenth watch for you, as I understand you grew up with it.
Yeah. I've seen it. Oh my God, I've seen it. I lost times. I would, as with most of Soviet comedies that we would watch over and over, me and my family, we can quote this film back to each other in the most random circumstances, and we would all know where the phrase is coming from. Nice.
I think the nearest thing to that for me was The Return of the Pink Panther, the Peter Sellers film. Although that one I haven't watched for many, many years. It was one I watched countless times as a young kid, and my dad liked it as well. But I suspect it doesn't stand up very well with the whole Cato and the slightly racist stuff in there. But anyway, so with this film, it's from 1964. It's like the first full film by this director. And this director, Elem Klimov, is probably much better known for the last film he made. Wouldn't you agree?
I think so, yes. Although I would say maybe not in Russia, because Russians are very familiar with this film. But probably worldwide, he's probably most well known for his last film.
Yes, which is Come and See, Иди и смотри, which is a very different film. I haven't seen it yet, but everyone I've spoken to about it is basically like, I'm glad I watched it. It's an important film. It's an extremely well done film, but it's also like a deeply traumatizing film.
And actually, you know what? In fact, I was reading some of the reviews of Welcome or No Trespassing on English-speaking websites, and some people were commenting how they were unaware that someone who shot Come and See was capable of shooting this, light kids comedy, basically.
Yeah. But again, the central protagonist in both is a young boy. I mean, I think Inichkin is, quite a few years younger. Like, I would say he's like 8 or 9?
Right.
Maybe 10. Whereas I want to say the character in Иди смотри is probably like 12, 13,
And Elem Klimov actually had a lot of experience working with kids, even prior to his first film, prior to Welcome or No Trespassing. When he was in Moscow Film School, some of his, third-year thesis, some of his previous works also involved work with kids. So he's been working with children throughout his career, actually. He's been very good with them, according to, Diaries and remarks.
Okay, that's cool. Yeah, which explains how he's able to get fantastic performances out of him.
Yeah, absolutely. They adored him. The kids adored him. I read something that he would not try to give them the directions in the classical sense, but he would always create games and some weird assignments, and they adored it. They adored him.
Yeah, it seems to be one of those things, like kids' performances in films, is they're either great and totally naturalistic, or they're awful and they're kind of like...
That's true. That's true.
Anakin in...
That's true. Another film that comes to mind that's not really related, but François Truffaut's 400 Blows. Remember the stunning performance of the kid, the main guy? I don't know if you're familiar with that film at all.
I've not seen it. No.
Then forget it. No, don't worry about it. You should watch it. It's an amazing film too, by the way, with incredible performance by a kid of roughly the same age. I would say it's 8 or 9. But Truffaut made him cry during casting.
Oh,
he wanted raw performance from kids, so it's kind of a different approach, but the same result.
Yeah. A thing I'm very fond of, haven't watched it for quite a few years, was a British sitcom called Outnumbered.
I've never seen it.
Yeah, it's really good. It's a sitcom, but it's quite different from the classical, laugh track, canned laughter type.
Outnumbered, you said?
Outnumbered, yes.
Yeah,
it's
well worth checking out because the kids in that are very, very funny. And it sounds like they took a similar approach with them in terms of like giving them like sort of informal brief about what the scene was about and what they would be talking about, but not getting them to memorize and recite lines.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that seems like it's a good way to get the best out of young actors. But I don't know, but I just know that it's a famously difficult thing.
Of course, I mean that makes sense, right? Because you want to elicit natural performance from a kid who is maybe a bit more conscious about acting.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to mention about Klimov, just in passing, really, was he was part of I guess a Soviet cinema power couple, if that's a sensible way of referring to it. I guess maybe less so now, but it sounds like at the time, if anything, his wife, Larissa Shepitko, was a more famous director than he was.
I would say so, although he was pretty well regarded and highly acclaimed during his years in school too, but I would say that she was definitely more out there. I'm not sure that's the case anymore, but at the time, definitely.
Yeah, they were both not particularly prolific in terms of the number of films they made. With her, she was 40 or 41 when she was tragically killed in a car accident. So
yeah,
with him, he did Come and See, and then that was it.
So, yeah, but it's famous because he would always be very picky about the kind of films that he would make, and he would always want them making his way. He was stubborn, famously stubborn on not accepting anything less than that. So a number of his films were never made because of that, because of the contradictions that he had.
Yeah, and the, I guess, pressure from the people giving the green light.
In fact, he made this film, Welcome or No Trespassing. It wasn't his script. The screenplay is written by Simen Lungin and Ilya Nusov, I think. Yeah, but he was originally going to make something else as his thesis film, but it just didn't get green light.
Gotcha. But he obviously really liked what was in this one.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, and the screenwriters approached him with this screenplay, which they said was about the summer camp, basically. And then they worked on the screenplay a bit more together. And then he decided to turn that into his thesis film.
Yeah, it's really good. But we should probably watch it again. Yes,
let's do it.
Okay, so what we like to say at this point every time round to get some actual Russian language into the podcast is we say "поехали,"
which means let's go.
Yeah. Okay. So 3, 2, 1. Поехали. And welcome back. Tanya and I have just watched Welcome or No Trespassing, or as we learnt before the break, No Holiday for Inichkin. But before we get into the discussion of what we thought on this rewatch, over to you, Tanya, for the summary. Oh, usual spoiler warning, if you haven't watched it yet and don't want to know what happens, go away and watch the film. It's only 70 minutes. The chances are this podcast episode will actually be longer than the film. So very quick watch.
Right. So, as for the summary, the film takes place in a summer camp in 1963. They were shooting, actually, in 63. It takes place in the summer camp in the Soviet Union, you have to realize, was the place where the majority of the kids went over the summer. The Soviet pioneers from early on, from ages ranging from 6 up until 15 or 16, kids would go to these camps. And if you're older, you can still stay in camp afterwards and become like an RA or, a kind of administrator or head of a group, be assigned to a group of kids. So it takes place in this classical Soviet summer camp over the course of the summer. And there's this one kid who is really, his name is Kostya Inochkin. He doesn't want to play by the rules. So early on, we get into the camp and they have this routine where they go swimming, and they can only swim in this charted territory, in this small space within the river, because the medical staff of the Soviet camp believes that it's dangerous to swim any further and you may pick up some diseases.
Yes, so infections from the locals.
Right, there's this fear of infections from the locals, so kids can only swim in this small part of the river.
It looks really hilarious when the camera pans back from that and you see it.
Yeah.
Little square.
And yeah, we kind of get a sense that it's bullshit from very early on. We understand that there really are no infections, but there's this prevalent fear from the medical staff, so kids are not allowed to swim beyond that point. But Kostya Inochkin, of course, finds an actual hole in the net that's being used as a fence. And he swims away. He swims to the locals. He swims to the other side, to the island on the other side of the river.
Well, and he also does it whilst butt naked.
He swims in his swimsuit, but then he takes it off on the other side on the island. Yeah.
Yeah, because we're literally introduced to Kostya Inochkin
by his butt. First thing we see, I didn't realize that. That's the first thing we see, actually.
Because they say the introduction to a character is a very important moment in a film. So.
That's true. That's true.
I can't think of too many characters where that's
the first
true.
thing.
I mean, you could sort of say in Lost in Translation that it's slightly like that with Scarlett Johansson.
Oh, I see. That's
on the windowsill, but she's at least wearing clothes, even if they're kind of see-through. But anyway.
So, and by the way, we are getting introduced to Inochkin through the eyes of the camp's administrator, Comrade Dinin, who is this middleman functioneer, the typical, Soviet bureaucrat who happens to be the administrator of this camp, and he is watching the kids through the binoculars, standing on top of some hill.
Yeah, and that's how he's introduced. He's introduced as a distant figure
on top of
observing.
The hill, away from the crowd. Yes.
Yes.
So Inochkin, breaks the rules, so he has to be punished. So they have this huge meeting of the entire camp, and Dinin stands once again on stage away from everyone else. He is above, and he expels Inochkin from the summer camp for breaking the rules and swimming to the other side.
Well, it wasn't his first offense.
It wasn't his first offense either, right?
He lists all of his other offenses.
Yes, he's been breaking all the rules that are there for the sake of rules. He breaks the discipline, because he questions it constantly. So Dinin decides to expel him. And Inochkin leaves the camp. One of the staff members of the camp take him to the train station, and then they leave because they assume that Inochkin will take the train.
Yes, he's left on the platform to get the train himself, because it's actually the guy doing the milk delivery, and I noticed this second time round. He basically said, "I can't wait here with you because the milk will spoil, so I have to get back. So, just stay here till the train gets here."
I think he does errands around the camp, but one of his errands is milk delivery. And so while Inochkin waits for his train on the station, he starts to imagine what it's going to be like when he gets home to his grandmother, because he lives with his grandmother, and what she's going to say when he arrives, when she learns that he's been expelled from the camp. And that is probably my favorite part of this film.
Oh, yes.
His daydream of what it's going to be like when he comes home. And his grandmother hears all about it, and she dies. she dies from sorrow and grief because her grandson has been expelled from camp. And then there's a funeral scene as he imagines it.
Which is hilariously realised, but we don't want to spoil the punchline there, but suffice it to say, he can't subject his grandma to this fate, so...
He cannot, so he decides to go back to the camp and just stay there because he can't let her see him like that. So he goes back in the night.
Yeah, he infiltrates the camp.
He sneaks back in, and he goes on illegal status. How do you say? I don't know what's the proper translation of that. There's a title card.
I'm really glad you brought that one up, because I noticed, the translation, because I tend to watch these things with subtitles, just because Russian is okay, but the subtitle for the card there was he becomes an outlaw, and
right.
Whilst that's kind of it gets the basic meaning, but I don't think it really nails it, because if you say an outlaw, I'm imagining like someone in the Wild West or Robin Hood, so it's very like
criminal, right?
Swashbuckling. Yeah, but almost like a romantic thing, whereas the subtitle is like it's like literally like Perishol. I forget, I wrote it down somewhere, but it's like he moves over to illegal status.
Yeah, он переходит на нелегальное положение.
Yeah, there you go. Yes.
See how many times I've seen the film?
And that seems to me, I mean, again, with my non-native sense of these things, but it seems very much like legalese or bureaucratese,
right,
rather than like...
Oh, absolutely.
He became an outlaw,
No. Yeah, no, you're making a good point. It's very bureaucratic.
Yeah, and we'll get into this again like later in the discussion, but one of the funny things about the film is its use of language.
Yes.
But yes, so we have the...
So Inichkin acquiring illegal status and starts to live under the stage in the camp.
Yes, unbeknownst to the leadership.
Right, and then we follow him through the few days that he lives there, and kids discover him and they start helping him. They bring him their food, and they create all different plots to kind of help him lead his life underground, quite literally. But the main problem is that the Parents' Day is coming, and Parents' Day is another big event during the Soviet times, and even going into Russia. Parents' Day is this one big holiday, usually towards the end of a camp, where all the parents and relatives of kids who are in camp come over, and they, see their kids having a great time, and, they kind of, make a day out of that. So the Parents' Day is a big thing, because some of the kids have really important, influential people, and there's one kid, this girl, whose dad is a big, I think he's director of a company.
Yeah, it's never made clear.
It's never made clear. He's a big shot.
He's comrade Mitrofanov, and so Mitrofanova is kind of like Dinin's, not exactly favourite, but he's of the impression that she has to be sort of the centre of attention and most important.
Because of her father.
Because he's a big deal, yeah.
Right, so the Parents' Day is coming, and Inishkin's grandmother is coming. So there's no chance that they can keep up this ruse.
Yeah, one of the kids, I think it's one of the kids, explains that just about everyone who's a relative, like anyone who just doesn't really have anything to do, so you get all these kind of aunts and uncles.
Everybody comes. That's what they, everybody who's of kin comes over, who has completely unrelated
some connection,
to the parents. Right, all right.
Yeah.
So they the kids they create a few plots to try to cancel the Parents' Day, but they obviously fail in the end. So they realize that the Parents' Day is inevitable, and closer towards the end, some of the junior leadership of camp also finds out that Inichkin is in fact in the camp, and they try to help him as well. So basically, towards the end, everyone other than Dinin is aware that Inichkin is here, and they're all fine with him. They want to help him. But they know that if Dinin finds out, then it's gonna be a fiasco. So they kind of try to hide him from him. But so then the Parent Day comes, and on Parent Day they have this masquerade, which as it's portrayed in the film, that same masquerade has been happening for years. The instructions for the Masquerade are old. Some of the words have disappeared already because it's such an old manuscript. But it's the same thing that's been going on there every single time on Parents' Day.
Yeah, from Deanin's point of view, it's like, it's tried and true, don't mess with the formula.
Right, that's the guy who's kind of really afraid to step away from the formalistic rules of this, of the system. So the Masquerade is coming, and the big star of the Masquerade is Corn, the Queen of the Fields, the Corn, which is also an obvious jab at the Khrushchev times and the Khrushchev's infatuation with the corn. This crazy idea of trying to, grow it in Russia where the conditions really don't allow for it. I think it was actually after his trip to the United States where he saw the corn and the use of corn syrup and everything, and he decided to kind of implement that in the Russian agriculture. But it did not pan out at all.
Yeah, it was an absolute disaster. There was massive soil erosion and stuff, partly because he was so keen to get this done that he wouldn't listen to people saying, firstly, this isn't a good fit, and secondly, you have to do all this preparation if you're going to try and grow corn on this kind of soil.
Right. There was a massive PR campaign, promoting corn on every corner. I've seen so many posters from the time with corn as
really?
Yes, it was a huge deal at the time. So obviously the star of the Masquerade is Corn, the Queen of the Fields.
Yes.
And in Dinin's playbook, obviously the part of the Queen of the Fields should be played by Mitrofanova, the daughter of the big shot who's coming. Because he wants to appease to him.
And, dear listener, we'll leave it up to your imagination whether this all goes to Dinin's plan.
Right. So shall we leave it at that then?
Yeah, let's leave it at that. So yeah, and that's the film. Like I said at the start, it's very compact. It's like barely properly feature length. I mean, it may not even technically be feature length. It's like 70 minutes.
70 minutes, yeah.
But they pack so much in, and like we've already alluded to,
it's very dynamic.
Yeah, very dynamic and very satirical. Like on the one level, there's a lot of very obvious visual gags, butts are funny.
Butts are funny. There's quite a bit of nudity in the film, actually.
There is, like a surprising amount.
Yeah, and I read a little bit of Elem Klimov's Diaries while he was shooting the film. And,
oh, wow.
Yeah, there are notes available, and afterwards when he was, it was part of his thesis, so he had to write the theoretical part of it, where he reflected on the experience of shooting the film, and in that particular scene, according to him, the kids were really, that was one of the hardest things for them to shoot when they devised a plan to cancel the Parents' Day. One of the plans that they devised is, to create this epidemic. So they all jump into, what's the...
Stinging nettles.
Right. They actually did that. That's all true.
Did they? Oh,
they did.
Because I was like, how did they fake this?
But no, that was all true. But the hardest part for the kids was not the part where they jumped. They were okay with that, but actually undressing in front of females.
Oh,
stuff.
okay.
So the only way they did it was they asked all the girls to kind of leave the set for that particular scene.
Yeah,
isn't that hilarious?
Fair. Because I mean, with adults, that's a very self-conscious thing, so
right.
Totally understandable that kids would feel that way as well. That is like a very wince-inducing scene, though. Just just imagining putting yourself in that place, and
oh my god!
I mean, just getting stung on the arm with a stinging nettle is very unpleasant, and it's like, I hope I can go for the rest of my life without that happening to me again.
Yeah, I'm okay.
But just the idea of getting completely starkers and being covered in like welts, it's just like, oh
yeah,
so nasty. But it is a great, it sounds overblown, but it's a great cinematic moment in terms of just like identifying with the characters.
Right, and the lengths that the kids are willing to go to for their friend.
Absolutely.
Right, and that's I think it's the inherent contradiction that's reflected in the title as well.
Yes.
There's a lot of there's a big kind of the entire film is built on this contradiction between what's real and what's the ideal. What the rule says it is and what it actually is and how the kids should behave and what they're doing. You know, very early on in the film, we see this huge, poster that says that kids are the owners of the camp.
Yes.
which obviously that's not the case because, their freedoms are very limited. There's harsh discipline. So there's always this kind of, there's tension between what's real and what it's supposed to be. And I think that was part of the idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And it doesn't portray Dinin, at least I don't think, as a horrible or a mean guy particularly. He's fairly benevolent, but seriously misguided.
I think he's just, he's the product of his own time. He's stuck in inside his own beliefs of what it's supposed to be. He's part of the system. He's the cog in the system. And he feels uncomfortable, questioning it.
Yeah, he is very anti, thinking for yourself. And this is manifested both in his expulsion of Inichkin from the camp. One of the reasons, the prior violations he cites is the fact that Inichkin has been reading a book under his covers with a torch. And then the rest of the kids started doing it.
Right. Even girls.
And now they're all reading books.
Right.
And then, of course, his interactions with Valia, who's one of the, the Komsomol, young adults who are the kind of, the junior leadership.
Yes, right.
That interaction when she's making the case for, leniency with Inichkin, it's really, dismissive.
Right. And there's a good scene when he comes over, or she comes over, and he asks her, Dinin asked Valia what she's reading. And she's like, that's Chekhov. And he suggests that instead of Chekhov, she should read the rules of the camp or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
Something technical. That's kind of, that's very telling.
Yeah, and literally when she says Chekhov, he says, why?
Why? It's funny. She said, it's funny. And his response is, you laugh too much.
Yeah. And there's another point I noticed this time around, which I guess passed me by the previous time I watched this, was there's also a point where she's trying to get the kids to recite as part of one of the performances some Mayakovsky.
Yes.
And he's like, let's not
do that. Yeah. So he's definitely not, malevolent. He's a product of the system.
I love his little nostalgic, it's not exactly a tirade, but when he lectures the kids about what summer camp was like when he was their age.
Right. Which is another, in my opinion, it's another obvious jab towards, Khrushchev times, because it was, in the Soviet Union, it was the time of the thaw, when there was, censorship was at its all-time low, and a lot of more things were allowed, but, Khrushchev was famous for, giving his speeches about how amazing things are right now compared to how they were back in the day.
Yeah, we had a prime minister in a kind of a similar time in history. I for shame, forget exactly which one it was, but he said, "You've never had it so good." And that's almost sounds like that would have been his slogan as well.
That's like Comrade Dinin right there.
Yeah, well, and by extension, Khrushchev, yeah.
Yeah, by the way, unless it's not extremely obvious, that film was considered really controversial at the time because it was kind of a metaphor for the entire country. The summer camp was the Soviet Union with all its rules for the sake of rules that, don't really make sense, but you don't want to question them. Harsh discipline, the fear of the outside where you may catch infections and some locals.
Yeah, because that one, the first time around, that sort of, passed me by because I was mainly focused on the stuff that happens inside the camp. But yeah, very clearly the outsiders are kind of like the West.
Dangerous, and you don't want to be there. And, you don't want to question it.
And you also don't want to have too much contact with those outsiders because...
Right, because they may give you ideas.
Yeah. Exactly. So, yeah, I don't know how that passed me by the first time, but there's a lot in this film. It
really is. And it's, it's amazing that it was even released, that it got green lit.
Yeah.
There are a few stories surrounding how the movie actually made it to the screens. I talked to my dad about it, and he knew the screenwriter, actually. And my dad claims that it was just a bureaucratic mistake. My dad claims that, in order for a film to be released, you had to have this kind of, a formal letter from the committee saying that it's been released, and people in charge of greenlighting films, they didn't watch everything because there were quite a few films. So they saw that this was a thesis from, a highly acclaimed student in Moscow Film School, and it's about a summer camp. So how bad can it be?
Exactly, yeah. That'll be fine, I'm sure.
They greenlit it, and it went, people saw it. And once they saw it, and once they kind of realized what it was, there was kind of, there was no turning back. Or I'm not sure whether I completely believe in that story, but it's a good story nonetheless.
It's a great story, and that does seem very much like if we withdraw it, we'll just be drawing attention to the fact that it's subversive.
Exactly. You would create more of a scandal by banning it after it's been released.
Yeah, we'll just be like, I don't see what the big deal is.
Yeah, it's just a summer camp,
We have free speech here.
But I read another story. Another story goes that when Goskino, which was the state-run production company and basically the censorship committee, the committee in charge of greenlighting the films, when they saw it, they didn't want to release it. But Sergei Gerasimov, who was basically the first man at Moscow Film School at the time, he's also a highly acclaimed filmmaker with a big reputation at the time. When he saw the film, he personally took it upon him. He had a big fight with the studio, and he was the one who made sure that the film got delivered to Khrushchev. And then the story goes that Khrushchev saw the film and he kind of liked it, he enjoyed it, and that's how it got released. There are all the different kinds of stories, whatever you want to believe in. It is a sort of a miracle that it was greenlit at the time and people actually had a chance to see it back in '64.
Yeah. And I can see why it's so beloved, because it's so much fun, because it's like, as an idea, it's a relatively hard sell. Like, if I tell my friends, there's this brilliant film about a Soviet summer camp and some kids, rebelling against the authorities, go, that's just going to be corny or cheesy. Well, corny, no pun intended, but
Right. Right.
But it's so nicely done. And I want to talk a little bit about the direction is really good. Just
right. It is, and I think it's not corny because, at least in my mind, it wasn't conscious attempt of ideological subversion. Elem Klimov doesn't hate the Soviet Union. He's not a diversant. He just it's irony. He obviously loves his home country, but he also can't help but notice all the double standards and all the ideological propaganda. So I think it comes from the place of love, and that's why it's not. It's honest.
Yeah, I feel like if you were attempting to do a satire from the outside, it probably would feel more mean-spirited, I suspect.
Yeah, exactly. He's the one who's lived through that himself, right? So it comes from experience.
Yeah, and he's poking fun at things that, like you say, are real problems with the system rather than just his. And
there's not a single dislikable character. There's not a single antagonist in the big sense.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, Dinin is.
He's troubled, but
technically, an antagonist, but not because he's this vicious bastard,
Right, yeah.
He's no Stalin figure in terms of how he rules the camp.
Definitely not.
In terms of some of the direction things, I love the way that the imagination scenes of Inichkin are done. Particularly, we've talked about it already, but his imagining his grandma's reaction, but that's literally when he's sitting on the bench waiting for the train to come. The train arrives, the doors open, and then he's in the corridor outside
approaching the apartment.
Yeah, and then the scene finishes and it's the train doors opening up again, so it's like
they're closing. The train doors are closing because the train is leaving the station.
Yeah, exactly.
I love all of his imagination scenes. There's one where he's already underground and he just imagines, because he overhears someone saying that he I don't know how to properly translate it, but he spoiled Dinan's blood.
Oh, yeah, like Dinan's blood has boiled because of, like, the implication is the stress that Inichkin has caused to him or something. Like, that's very much implied, but yeah.
Yeah, so he imagines what would actually happen if he literally spoiled some of Dinan's blood, you know, and how that would pan out. And that's another phantasmagorical, you know, sequence.
Yeah, and then the statue's coming to life when he comes back into the camp, and he set all of these things up. I like the fact that it's not just something random that, I mean, it is kind of random, but it's stuff you've already seen behaving in a way that you haven't seen before.
Speaking of those statues, that's another interesting point, because those statues are the ideals of what the pioneer should be, right? And that's, their behavior goes completely, you know, in contradiction with how kids actually behave in camp.
Well, with that, like, you see them all together in a row, these statues, but the first one that it focuses on is a little girl reading, and I forget the caption. It's like Uchenia?
Uchenia Svet, right?
Yes, it's, so that's like, knowledge is...
Light.
Yes, knowledge is enlightenment.
Right, but I bet you she's not reading Chekhov. She's probably reading some rules.
Yeah, maybe Gorky. Maybe you're allowed to read him, but yeah.
Something ideologically appropriate.
Subtle little digs, particularly as we go on to have, as we've mentioned before, Dinan and his attitude to reading and, like, you know, choosing the art that you'll see yourself. And he's like, nope, he doesn't really have time for any of that.
Right. There's a scene that they cut out, that they had to cut out because of censorship. I don't know if you know this.
No.
There's a scene that was supposed to be in the film, but they had to cut it out during, you know, the final review of the film. And it's the scene where Dinan sits in his office, and he has this fridge, which he uses as a safe, where he keeps all the files on all the 263 kids in the camp. And, you know, those files are being constantly updated. And so he keeps them in the fridge, and whenever he's missing something from the file, he goes deeper into the fridge, and the camera follows him into the fridge, and it turns out that the fridge is actually more of like a portal with a corridor, and so Dinan goes through that corridor, and at the end there's a door which he opens, and it opens into the landscape with a lot of hills, and on top of each hill there's a stage similar to the one that he's standing on, and there are people like him who are kind of, you know, delivering speeches from those stages. That's the scene that got cut out.
Oh, that's a shame, because that sounds really cool, but on the other hand, yeah, I can see why they would have said, nope, you're not doing this.
Right, but that adds to the, you know, fantasy. The film is very whimsical, and there are a lot of, like, this fantasy scenes that are very nicely done.
There's even a little bit of commentary on censorship in the film. Like, one of the things that all the kids look forward to is there's a movie screening.
Oh, yeah. Fan the Tulip.
Is that a real movie, or...?
It is.
Oh, okay.
It is a real film.
It's quite a, like, even old by that time, like...
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure when it was shot, but yeah, it's a real film.
Yeah, oh, okay, cool, yeah, I wasn't sure about that, but it looks very much like a sort of swashbuckling, like, Musketeers, or that sort of a thing.
Which was a rage in the Soviet Union at the time. Boys adored, you know, the Three Musketeers, D'Artagnan.
Okay.
That was all the rage. Dumas was a big writer for the Soviet Union.
Far enough back and far enough away and not particularly revolutionary in its content that it's like, well, that's safe. It's just adventures, you know.
Right.
Fine. So yeah, that's what they're watching. But whilst the performances is going on, you get a bit where something slightly risque happens. You've got a young woman in, I guess you'd say, like, fairly extreme, like, décolletage in terms of the top that she's wearing.
Right.
And so the Komsomol guys who are in charge of the projector put this card or something in front of the light so that it's no longer projecting to the whole audience.
But they can still see it.
Yes, yeah.
They are watching it themselves, but they're just not allowing kids to see it.
And the kids are all like, hey, watch the film. And of course, and then it cuts to a new scene, and then they move the card away, and, you know, it goes back.
It goes back to the action scene.
Which is fine.
Right.
Yeah, again, I love that there's that little subversive thing just in, like, an everyday activity or even just like one of the special treats of the camp, they'd still have this thing and they kind of make this little dig at the system even with that. It's very cool. Is there anything I'm missing? Anything else that I should be talking about?
Let me see. Well, this time, actually, what I thought about is, all the influences that kind of, that affected Klimov when he was making the film. One of the references that I didn't get for quite some time, but struck me as relevant when I started film school, was how much he was influenced by the silent movies in making of this film.
Okay, yes.
There, first of all, the use of intertitles within the film. When they appear on screen, that's an obvious, homage to the silent movies. And then there are a few scenes that seem very, there's a scene with a pig that kind of escapes and runs through the camp. And the music that they use for that scene is exactly the kind of music that you would hear in the action scenes of silent movies.
Yeah, and there's another point earlier on in the film. I forget exactly which scene it is, but again, I remember thinking, that's quite silent movie-esque.
Yes, right, because that's obviously a big influence, and because he's also a film student, right? So he learned all of that.
Right.
So he used that a lot, and that's where a lot of his sensibilities are coming from. And Eisenstein is a big influence on him. The character of the head of the medical staff, this woman who's in charge, who's also quite a character. She very much reminds me of, I don't know if you've seen Battleship Potemkin.
I have, yes.
But there's this famous shot of a woman with crooked glasses.
Yeah, this is during the step sequence, right?
Right, yes, yes it is. And so, there's, in Inishkin's imagination, when he spoils Dinnin's blood, the sequence starts off with that medical staff, and there's a close-up on her face, and her voice is just a siren. That shot is almost replicated exactly like Eisenstein's.
Like the framing and everything.
Yeah. In my experience, I saw Eisenstein later, after I saw Welcome or No Trespassing.
Sure,
so in my mind, Eisenstein replicated Klimov's shot, not the other way around.
Right. Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Was there anything else? Because you mentioned Klimov's diaries and reading those. Was there anything else particularly that you recall from those that was like juicy or interesting?
There were a lot of interesting stories from production. They created the 20 statues. In the scene where Inishkin goes back into the camp at night, and all the statues are kind of representing him for that. They created those statues. Particularly for that scene, and they wanted to transport it because they were filming in 3 different summer camps.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the kids were quite moving around. So, in order to easily transport them, they didn't have either the time or the means to make them from concrete or from cement. So they just did it from papier mâché. So all those statues are actually paper. And the production designer was commenting how he thought it's going to fail. He thought there's no chance that they're going to hold up, and that, but they did, and it worked out beautifully in the end.
Yeah, because those do look awesome. It's a very nicely designed.
Right? They don't look like they're made from paper, but they are.
No. I would have never got that. And I don't know why, but the black and white is just gorgeous. It's really nice.
That's also a choice. He's talking about that a little bit, why they decided to make it black and white. They didn't have, again, it was the time didn't permit them to shoot it in color.
Okay, yeah, because color film, is expensive.
It's expensive, and it's time consuming in terms of lighting the scenes. But they chose black and white for aesthetic reasons as well, because they thought that it would bring something of kind of the past.
Yeah, nostalgia.
Right. That's the word I was looking for. The wholly feeling, it's a memory,
Yeah, which, given, like, Deanin's nostalgia during the film, yeah. And
again, the homage to the silent films and, Klimov's own aesthetics.
Yeah, absolutely. And even in the one of the early title cards. It's right at the beginning. I think it says this film is dedicated to adults who were children.
And children who will surely be adults.
Yes, yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Klimov said himself that he intended this film more for adults rather than for kids. But it has this whimsy, of course, so he was very young when he shot it.
Yeah, because he would have been trying to work it out.
In his early 20s.
Early 20s, yeah. There is one thing I wanted to mention. I love the fact that they essentially do the Ferris Bueller ending, but like 2 decades before Ferris Bueller. So I was like, yeah, that was very fun.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really good. And if you haven't already watched it at this point, you should definitely go and check it out. It's 70 minutes of your life, and you will laugh a lot.
Another point that I want to. I just remembered.
Sure.
So Inishkin gets expelled from the camp because he swam. The final straw that broke the camel's back is that he swam on the other land, right? It turned out that Viktor Kosiv, who plays Inishkin's part, didn't know how to swim. He lied. He lied during casting because he wanted the part really badly. But when they already got to the location, Klimo found out that Viktor or Kostya in the film cannot swim. So they were shooting in an actual summer camp. So in the summer camp, there was this guy who was, an athlete who was a swimmer. So for a week, they were shooting scenes without Inishkin because Inishkin was learning how to swim at the time.
Well, again, they managed to cover that up. And
pretty well.
I would never have guessed. Awesome. Well, I think that's probably all we should say, so we're not giving away all of the jokes, but I think we both agree you definitely need to check this film out. But before we go, Tanya, is there anything you would like to direct listeners towards?
Oh, you're very kind to ask, Ali. I'm glad you did. I used to do a show that's probably going to be revived in some foreseeable future. I really hope I can get to do that again. I created a show on YouTube that is I view it as an extension of my stand-up and the weird perspective of a Russian living in the United States, during this turbulent times. So I created a show called Russian Something, which I wrote for it, and I'm on camera there. And it's 5-minute or 6-minute episodes about some of the current events that might not be really covered that much in foreign media, but are, the current events in Russia, from the perspective of a Russian. It's called Russian Something. You can find it on YouTube if you just type in Russian Something, or I have a website that's called TanyaLucky.com. TanyaLucky.com. You can find some of the episodes there as well.
Yeah, that's great. I'll include that in the show notes, because it's always really nice to get a more nuanced perspective, because just the way sometimes things are portrayed in the media and just the way that news works, it sometimes works against nuance, and it almost would seem like the entire Russian people are united in wanting to mess things up for the Americans and the West. And
I created a bit of a character there for myself as well. I'm this propagandistic Russian state-run media reporter or host of the news show. So I think it adds to the perspective a little bit.
Yeah, it's very Colbert-esque.
It is, and yes, I'm definitely influenced by that.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, so definitely have to check those out.
Thank you so much, Ali.
Thank you so much for being a guest, Tanya.
Oh, it was a pleasure. Thank you for having me, Ali.
Yeah, it's been great. All right, so thanks everyone so much for listening, and до свидания, folks.
До свидания.
So that's it for this episode, but before I go, I'd like to thank Sasha Ilukovich and the Highly Skilled Migrants for the use of their song Cold in our intro. You can find that song and the rest of their back catalogue on Bandcamp and Spotify. If you're enjoying the show, please consider supporting us by leaving a rating at Apple Podcasts or at podchaser.com. That second one, Podchaser, even lets you rate individual episodes, so if this episode particularly stood out to you, you can let other listeners know that you enjoyed it. Recommending the show on social media is hugely helpful as well. If you can spare a moment or two to do that, it would really make my day. Thank you very much. Speaking of social media, please find us and say hi on Facebook, Twitter or Instagram. You can also drop us a line at roosefilsunite@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening, take care of yourselves, and bye for now. So, you're still here?
Yeah, the podcast's finished?